2019. So everybody welcome and thank you.
And now introducing our first panelist, Angela.
Hello, everybody. My name is Angela Ellis, as she said, and I'm going to be talking career pivots and promotions. It's actually a good time for me to be talking to you about pivots because I'm currently in one right now myself. Most recently, I was at ABC News for 10 years, and I just left Good Morning America, where I was the head of the first hour. So, it's a 2-hour show, and I programmed everything that we did in the first hour of that show. So I'm tired because morning TV is a lot. I think I heard somebody mention that they're working morning TV, so the schedules and the pacing and everything is pretty brutal. So it's been kind of a marathon, especially in the last year that I was in that position of just kind of pushing forward and doing a lot in my career, but then getting to a point of realizing that I was ready for a pivot. So I'm happy to talk to you guys about it as I'm kind of learning this phase of the process for me. I've gone through a couple in my career, but can I just start off with asking how many people are kind of in the first and the early stages of your career by raising your hand? How many, what about mid-career level? And advanced? So the great thing, between mid and advanced, the great thing is that we're all kind of on the same path, or the same, in some respects, a treadmill where you're constantly changing. So whether you're just starting out or you're somewhere in the middle, or you're like me and you've kind of been doing this, in my case, for 20-something years, the way things are now and the way they should be is you're constantly evolving, and your career should be constantly evolving as well. So one thing that was actually great for this talk, I didn't realize it's nice that there are so many people, but I didn't realize it was going to be like a podium and all this. I'm glad I was prepared with my note cards. And one of the things I was happy to have come across is, have you guys, I know the book doesn't officially come out until the 18th, but has anybody listened to or heard excerpts of Michelle Obama's book, Becoming? So I got the Audible, the download that came yesterday or day before yesterday, and somewhere toward the beginning of the book is something that, as I was listening to it, I knew I wanted to start off with, where she says basically that question that generally all of us get when you're young: what do you want to be when you grow up? And she says, as if growing up is finite, as if at some point you become something and that's the end. And that's kind of definitely applicable to our careers and where we are now and the state of business these days, where it's not about climbing the ladder, but it's about kind of shape-shifting. And as your needs change, as you grow, as your industry changes, that you do so as well. I found that I kind of feel like I'm in my 40s. And I feel like my generation is kind of that bridge between the way things used to be, where you were on a career track, you were trying to climb a ladder, to what things are now, where you're a lot more fluid in your career, how long you stay at places. And right now, the average is just under 4.5 years that you'll stay at any one company. And it used to be 25 to 30 years, so that's a big difference. If you're just starting out in your career, that number is actually about 2.5 years. So if you're thinking that like every couple of years you have an opportunity, or it's okay for you to take a different step, to go on a parallel path, that's something that was very counterintuitive, I felt like, for me growing up. I knew that I kind of started off at NBC News, and I was on this track where when anybody asked me what did I want to be when I grew up, it was I want to be president of NBC News. And I was really obnoxious about it. I was like, well, president of NBC News. I was really serious and always volunteering to log tapes and like do everything because I wanted to just put my head down in my 20s and eventually work my way up. I got about 6 years into my career at NBC. I was at Dateline NBC, which was a great place to be and to learn. I felt that I was on a career track there, and that was the first time that it hit me. I don't really know if I want this anymore. I feel like I've changed, and when I look around and I see people who have been here for 10, 15, 20 years, I don't really know if this is a thing for me. So that was the first time I kind of thought it's time for me to do a career pivot. So since we keep saying this phrase, who can give a definition? How would you define career pivot? Anyone? What would you say would be a career pivot?
A career pivot would be evaluating the space that you're in, seeing if you're happy or not. You're earning for me, would be if I'm earning the income I want, if there's more, and whatever those answers are, that I would shift myself to achieve that and to get that, whatever that was.
So, anybody else?
I would define it as going out and making like adjustments to however your industry is changing all around it, and just seeing how you yourself can exist in that space as it changes over time.
I would say diversifying your skills and using those skills to jumpstart you into a different industry.
Succinctly, making a change from one career to another.
Yeah, well, actually, the interesting thing that I looked up, just to make sure that I was talking about this in the correct way, because I've been saying, oh, I'm doing a career pivot, but actually I realized when I left GMA in August, I was talking to a woman that does talent development and recruitment for the Gates Foundation, and she's a family friend who was just giving me some advice about, because it's been a while, 10-something years, 12 years, since I've kind of put myself back in the job market. So I was telling her, I'm like, yes, I'm doing this career change because I know I'm ready to leave news and probably TV, but I want to stay in communications, so maybe corporate communications, so I want to do a career change. And she said, actually, it's not a change. And the definition that I've seen, it's basically leveraging the skills that you have, understanding all the experience that you have, how that can relate in a parallel field. So for me, right now, I'm thinking I'm leaving news and I'm taking all the skills that I've had from journalism school, from being in network television news, and leveraging that and using those skills to move into corporate communications or something. So having defined that, I'll talk a little bit again about my first career pivot, that moment that I decided when I was at NBC that it was time for me to do something different. And I thought my pivot was going to be, I want to have my own production company, and I want to be independent, I want to do my own thing, and I wanted to do it abroad. So I took a leave of absence from NBC. I kind of knew it was going to be permanent, but kind of needed the safety net. And left and moved to Italy and took some classes in international politics. But it was more of a means to an end. I basically wanted to live in Italy for a little bit and have a student visa to do it. But then while I was there, I wanted to do freelance work. So I thought maybe I'm more of an independent spirit, and the whole big company thing really isn't me, and I want to do my own company, so I'll start by just doing freelance projects. So I did that for a while, and it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I got to do documentaries, which I hadn't worked on before. And it was a great kind of way to build out my resume and to get these great experiences that I wouldn't have gotten if I just stayed on that one track. But then what I realized, and this is part of a career pivot too, is it's a learning experience, and the grass isn't always necessarily greener on the other side. Once I got into that kind of field of independent production and working with a production company on that documentary, and saw how hard the owner of that company had to work and hustle and constantly, even when we were working on a project, make sure that the next project was going, I was kind of like, I don't really think that's me. I'm not about that level of hustle. So it turned out to be a good thing for me to go through that experience and then realize, okay, maybe this isn't quite the right pivot. So then comes pivot number 2, which was moving back after 4 years and coming back to New York. That, I would say, maybe is less of a pivot. It was a necessity. I had to find a job. But again, in that experience, the experience that I had coming from longer format and doing something a little bit different than the news I had been doing, gave me the skill set to market myself to work for NPR, something a little bit different. It was still news, but a different format. So I worked there for a little bit and then moved on to ABC. That was meant to be temporary. I worked for a couple of years on a show that was kind of an experiment that ABC was doing. We were producing for Discovery Channel. One of our anchors, Bob Woodruff, who had just been tapped as the replacement for Peter Jennings after he died, was in Iraq and an IED hit, and he was pretty severely injured. The show that I worked on was his return to the industry. So it's a great job, dream job, 2 years, and the show got canceled. In comes Good Morning America. So this was not a pivot, but it was a big change for me. I had never done morning television. I had never done short turnaround. I'd come from Dateline, which was long magazine format, to the documentaries and all of that, to, you have, a minute 15 to do a little quick piece on jeggings or politics or fluffy animals or whatever it was. So for me, it was temporary. I'm not a morning person. I'm not really that. I couldn't say before that I was into morning TV, but I took it as it's a job, and I'll take it as a learning experience. And so this is where I'll kind of start to get into the other part of this conversation, which is about promotions. So I was there a total of 8 years. And in that time, even though I was looking at it as this is just something kind of temporary, 8 years kind of ticked along and went pretty quickly. I started off as a freelance producer, and about every 2 years, I ended up getting a promotion. I can't say I necessarily initially was on that track and wanted that, but I'm sure like a lot of you have a certain work ethic, and if I'm doing something, I want to do it. And I do it to the best of my ability. And thankfully, I was in a place that acknowledged that and allowed me to kind of move up. So I went from a producer to a senior producer to a senior broadcast producer to executive broadcast producer. So title is obviously kind of arbitrary, but it was basically increasing levels of responsibility on the show and visibility on the show. So when it comes to promotions, the things that I can say about how you should go about it or the steps to take wherever you are in your career, these are the things that I found worked for me, either consciously or subconsciously. And the first one being deciding what you want. Where do you want to be in this company? And what do you want to do? And then make sure that you know the steps that you need to take to get there. I think a lot of times people just say like, oh, I think there's a bad rap right now for millennials and younger generations where people in later generations just think, oh, you guys just want to come in and want everything really easily and just say, okay, I want your job. How do I get it? Or you just want it immediately. But I see and I've talked to and I've mentored a lot of people at ABC who were doing the work and did see that they wanted to either eventually be on air or eventually take my job or be something somewhere in the production cycle. And doing that work and knowing what they have to do is really important. The second thing is ask for what you want. There are a lot of people, and this was at all levels in their career. There was a senior producer, I think, who I remember was complaining that our boss, the executive producer, didn't even know that I'm not already, or maybe she was a producer or a coordinating producer, some lower title, and she said, I can't believe he doesn't know I'm not already a senior producer. And that's what I want, that's the promotion, but he doesn't know that. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, but that's on you. You need to make sure that your bosses, your supervisors know what you want, and not in an obnoxious way and strutting into the boss's office like, I want your job, or how do I become EP, but making sure that whoever your direct manager is, whoever your supervisors are, that they know that you're in this to move along, that you're not just in the ranks and happy to be there, you're kind of silently waiting to be tapped on the shoulder. The other part of that is looking for opportunities. Sometimes it's hard, especially right now, and I think in most industries it can be difficult with layoffs or job freezes, hiring freezes, that maybe you can't say that there's a position the next level up from where you are that's readily available, that your company has that. But one thing, and this is something that worked for me, is to identify a role and have it created for you. And this, remember my dad told me, he was like, if you're good at what you do and you're invested in what you do and you make sure your bosses know that, they'll create something for you. And sure, it may not always happen, but it's worth a shot. So in my case, we had a new executive producer come in several years ago, maybe 5 or so years ago. And when he came in, he wanted to know, he was meeting with different people in the staff, just asking, thoughts, getting to know the show, if you had any advice or just anything for him. So I'm very candid with my bosses, with people I work with, and respectful, but I did point out a problem in the management flow. So this is when I was still a producer. And our seniors, the people who are kind of managing the show throughout the day and the night, it was a very strange schedule where it was kind of top heavy, and you had 5 or 6 people who were all doing the work of kind of editorially shepherding the show, and then at 4 o'clock they would all leave, and one poor mope came in, and he was on shift from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. 4 p.m. to 7 a.m. So he eventually went crazy. That was a really brutal shift, and that's having the whole weight of an entire 2-hour show, and all the breaking news and anything that might happen that time land on your shoulders. As a producer, I had to work with this man, and he was crazy, and he made my job difficult. So rather than talking about him, I told the new executive producer, we could really benefit from having staggered shifts, and instead of having morning people and then one guy at night, having an afternoon shift or kind of rigid. He said, great, you do that. You be the senior producer. Actually, first they tried to get me to take over his job on the overnights, which I said no, because I'm trying to have a life. So I ended up doing a 2 to 10 p.m. shift. So again, look for opportunities where you are, where you can go and have something created for you. And even if it doesn't work out, your bosses and people will think like, oh, this person is really thinking about the greater good of our company, of our show, of whatever it is that you do. This one is really important and very important to me. Find a mentor. Wherever you are, wherever you work, finding somebody who is entrenched, who has been there, who knows the company, who knows the politics. If you're like me, I'm not really into politicking, and again, I speak my mind to bosses, to everyone, again, respectfully, but I don't really kind of hold back if I feel like I have an opinion that is constructive. But having a mentor to kind of help me navigate when I absolutely had to be aware of politics was essential for me. So my person was someone who had been at ABC for like 20-something years, had really known the ins and outs of the company, and having someone like that, who also happened to be one of my bosses, came in very handy when it was time for my promotions. And I needed an idea of, okay, what are my chances, or what's the best way to approach the executive producer or the president of the news division? Finances, what should I ask for? I think for a lot of us, especially people of color, especially women, not quite sure when it comes to, okay, salary negotiations, is it okay to ask for this? What's even the ballpark? And having someone who frankly told me, this is what you should ask for, this is what this person makes, this is what I made when I was in your position, that was invaluable. So very important, find a mentor and make sure that you use that person as a continuing resource throughout your career pivots. If you have someone that you can always go back to, it's very helpful. Equally important, be a mentor. Finding people that can benefit from your experience, and that's something that I ended up doing a lot in the beginning, especially as I started to move through the ranks of what I was doing and my levels of responsibility. it would get a little difficult sometimes to make time for, you know, some of the younger producers coming in wanting to chit chat. And I was like, I have a whole show to fill out. Like, okay, sure, we can chat. And I'm really glad that I did and I made that time because one, I had that and I benefited from that. And two, I think it's important in general that you're sharing your knowledge and that we as people in general, as people of color, as women, that we keep sharing information. And I ended up learning from them sometimes in conversations of outside of the bubble of just what I was focusing on, kind of what was the buzz in the rest of the company on the rest of the show. And the other thing is when your bosses and your supervisors see you mentoring people and you reaching out to people, that shows them that you're capable of being a leader and that you're capable of being a manager and also that you're invested in the show or in the company or whatever it is that you work for because you're investing in their people as well. Taking advantage of any training or leadership opportunities while you're kind of looking to move ahead. If you work someplace that does built-in mentoring programs or leadership workshops, anything that you can be a part of where you're learning, but you're also being seen and you're showing these people that you have this interest in getting to the next level. And also these are things that you can use later on when you're trying to move into a different job, to a different company and say, well, I've had this leadership training. ABC was great. They had an executive learning program where you were matched with someone from another part of the company, not just ABC News, but Disney in general. So for me, it was great having the chance to be mentored by somebody, this was a different person than my boss in news, outside the company who can just give me information that I never knew, how to be a manager, how to be a leader, especially when you start moving up the ranks and you do find yourself promoted into a role where you're managing people and you haven't done that before. It's a learning curve. And it was helpful for me to be a part of this program and be able to frankly ask this person for guidance. Also, they had an executive management training program. That was really helpful. If you work someplace that even does that as a workshop or a one-day thing or an online program, do it. A lot of times a part of those include those work personality tests. There's one called the Harrison. And I took that one and it was spot on and kind of told me what I figured out back when I was living in Italy and realized I didn't want to have my own production company anymore. That I work best, I'm most efficient and happiest when I'm a strong, independent number two. Sometimes that feels weird and you don't necessarily go around saying like, everyone's like, I'm a boss and I want to be a boss. Yeah, I want to be a boss, but then there could be someone like the guy behind me who has to like deal with all the meetings and the budgets and all that stuff that I just want to get to the work and set the agenda and like make sure that everybody's doing it. So having that Harrison assessment kind of back up what I already thought I knew about myself, that was helpful. And I wouldn't have done that without having the program. Very important, do the work. As I said, a lot of people kind of get painted with the broad stroke if you're in the early stages of your career that these days generations don't want to actually put their head down and do the grunt work. I did it and everybody should have to do it. And that's true. Things have changed and you can take on a lot more responsibility than whatever the old way was of getting started in your industry. For me, it was, again, at NBC at Dateline, and it was logging tapes and sitting there for hours and hours upon end, transcribing everything with time codes on a piece of video. And the first big project that I had was the death of Princess Diana, and I was in charge of logging all of the tapes. Everything that had to do with Princess Diana that we had in our archives, I had to go in and I had huge rows of carts. It was a lot, but I did that work. And it made a difference, one, because it taught me the ins and outs of the business. It got me familiar with all that material, so I was able to work really closely with a lot of the really seasoned producers who were producing all the big pieces and all the specials because I knew the material best. So doing the work, whatever it takes, and then do a little bit more. Again, especially people of color, women, doing that extra step. I'm sure a lot of us have heard from our families, we have to give 110%. There were times when I felt like I was working at a place where it was okay to give 75%. So even if there was a day that I felt like I wanted to slack off a little bit and give 90, 85, that still was a little bit more. But going that extra step does get noticed. And then, I said this before, about me personally, of how I feel like, do I want to be the end-all, be-all boss? But I think it's very important to act like a boss. Act like you're in the position that you want to be in, because that makes a huge difference with perception. If your bosses, if your coworkers, if the people that are on your same level or below you already see you as being a leader because you project yourself as being a leader, that goes a long way too, and it just feels like a natural fit. And when people are having conversations about, who should do this, who would be the best person, your name will come up. That was something that, for me, it was often like kind of a facade. I didn't really know what it was I wanted or quite sometimes what exactly I was doing, but my facade was always, I got this. Inside is a complete mess, and sometimes all schwitzy and like having to like step aside or call a friend or call my mother. But the projection that I gave was confidence, I can do this. If it's something that I'm being asked to do that I don't know, I will say, I don't know, but I'll find out, and I'll do it, and projecting being a boss. So that was my promotions part. Now I'm pivoting back to career pivots, because again, that's where I am right now. And it was something that was an experience that I'll never forget, because it was extremely intense. It was like a master class in television production. I learned a lot, but it got to a point where I realized I was at a different place I am at a different place in my life, and I want something different than having my life tied to the news cycle, especially the current news cycle that we're in, as you guys can imagine, is a lot to be dealing with every day. And when you want to just kind of put your head in the sand and not think about a lot of the stuff that's going on, just sometimes to be able to just back off a little bit from it, I couldn't, and it was a 24-hour lifestyle. So how do you know when it's time for a pivot? That's the thing. You'll feel it, and this comes again at any stage in your career. It'll either be burnout, and you'll feel it physically, mentally. It could just be complacency, and you don't like that feeling. You want a new challenge. You need a new challenge. You are maybe concerned about job security, either at your company, in your industry. I think a lot of people, especially in TV news, sometimes we're all having these conversations of where do we go with all the changes in the way broadcast news and all the different forms of communication are changing. Am I in the right industry? Am I still on the cutting edge? So you have to ask yourself that question. Number two, again, just like with promotions, figure out what you want. But the thing here, and again, this is what I'm figuring out right now or going through right now, is that you don't have to be specific. It doesn't have to be a specific title or a specific job or place or location even. That was a little bit of a change, and that's been one of the things I think that was the hardest shift for me, was realizing that I didn't, for the first time, have something exactly that I said, this is what I'm going to do. So for me, my goal was, I want to build up my savings, give 7 weeks notice, and at the end of that, do all the stuff I need to do and have all my ducks in a row so that I can take time off to really figure out what I want to do in this next period. I think it's corporate communications. I've had contacts in that, but I feel like there are so many jobs and so many things that have kind of come up over the last couple of years. Chief content officer, chief storyteller at companies outside of news, outside of media, that I had no idea existed because my head was buried in the news sand. So again, you don't have to be specific, just know I want to make a move. I want to either leave what I'm doing now, or I want to work broadly in this industry. I don't know what title I want that. Then this is, again, you assess your skills, because you're going to leverage these things to be able to use them in your pivot, in your parallel career. whatever job you're going into. And figure out what those skills are. And for us in communications, the applications for it are almost endless. Being able to tell a good story, to market something, to brand something, all the things that kind of fall under what we do in communications can be used at almost any company. Pretty much, I think, all companies, government, private companies, nonprofits, everybody needs to have a story told. So figure out what your skills are and how you can apply them elsewhere. Then figure out what you lack. What do you need to learn? Have you been too focused in what you've been doing that maybe you've missed out on some of the things that are the skills that you'll need for a new job? So look at on LinkedIn and other places where you see job descriptions. Go through with a highlighter. What are the things that, okay, I can do that, I have that skill, I can basically market what I did to be a version of that. But then use a different color and highlight what are you lacking? And then learn it if you can. Take classes, read books, talk to people. Again, use the skills that we have as communicators to do research. Approach it like a project or a production and start off with, rather than going immediately into interviews, just talking to people and asking them what they do, what they like about it, and what they think you could bring to that role based on what your experiences were. Then there's, after you kind of have all that, market yourself. Do a new LinkedIn profile, do a new resume. In my case, I felt like, okay, I want to leave news. My entire resume, which I thought looked good, but a lot of people apparently didn't. I sent it around to a big group of friends and family members saying, can you guys take a look at this if you have any suggestions? And I got a flood of feedback that I wasn't expecting. And I ended up hiring a resume writer, and she totally rebranded me. When she sent it back, I was like, that's me. And it was great. It was like, I'm a communications specialist. So, and thanks to her, I saw myself in a different way without lying or embellishing. It was the skills that I had learned and used and developed over 20 years, all put on paper in a way that I wouldn't have thought of. So having someone help you do that, either a professional or family members or friends or coworkers that you trust to know that you're trying to leave, you can ask them. Again, researching and networking, talking to people, taking advantage of forums like this. Even if you're not at a career pivot point right now, if there's somebody who does something that you think is interesting, talk to them, stay in touch with them, find out what they do, and use it as a long-term resource that when the time comes, you can go back and say, oh, I'm thinking about getting into what you're doing. Can I shadow you? Or can I take you out to lunch or to coffee and find out a little bit more? And then number 7 and last, and this is again something that I'm telling myself every day as I'm getting comfortable for the first time in 20-something years of not like hustling to work every day and taking this period off to really make sure that I get what I want, which for me the most important thing is sanity, enjoying where I work and with whom I work. I really want to love my coworkers and be passionate about what I'm doing. So that's kind of broad, and I'm not going to just jump at the first thing that comes along. I want to make sure it's right. So the important points: be patient. That's hard for me. It's always been hard for a lot of people. Be realistic. For me, it was that I'm not going to work again in 2018. Which then when one way of looking at that was like, oh my God, I'm going to work again this year, and kind of freak out. But now I've kind of done a pivot and like, I'm not working again in 2018, and kind of use that as I don't work right now. And it's okay. But why is that okay? Because the other B is be prepared. I was prepared. I was financially prepared. Getting mentally prepared is another thing, but just make sure you have all your ducks in a row to be able to take the time that you need. Either if you're still at work and you're looking to get into something new and you can kind of do a seamless transition, great. If you can't, figure out what you need to do. And then lastly, be fluid. Because even though you might be doing something toward a certain goal, like I might, right now think, I really want to be in corporate communications, but along the way in this process, I might find that in talking to people, and so at the same time, and doing career development or doing talent development or something like that, actually I kind of like that. Maybe I want to do that next. Because again, it's about whatever you're passionate about. And that would be my advice for how to do a career pivot in 70 steps. So there's a question and answer period. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, Una Mosey with CBS This Morning. Thank you for being here, first of all, and sharing so openly. Why did you decide, or why are you leaning towards corporate communications right now?
I think because, for me, one, I had to become clear that I know a lot of people kind of leave what we do and go into PR, and like, PR is not quite, again, my personality. I always thought in terms of, especially being in New York, that it was like PR girls running around doing PR, which is nothing wrong with that, but I just didn't feel like that was me. And then I talked to someone in PR who kind of helped expand my understanding of all the different things that means. I don't think that being in an agency was kind of the right fit, so I looked at what else, like how else I can use those skills. And doing corporate communications, ideally internally, came from hearing stories of a woman who had a job with the Visa Foundation. I didn't know there was a Visa Foundation, who she does internal corporate communications. She's like their chief storyteller. Travels all around the world doing God knows what, but telling stories for the Visa Foundation. Internally, again, it's not like a PR external thing. Starbucks has an internal channel, Starbucks channel on their YouTube, and a lot of those videos, they're not ads, they don't have anything to do with selling coffee, it's about promoting their culture within. Amazon has the same thing. Netflix has the same thing. So that's what I'm basing it on, thinking, okay, there's a lot of opportunity to still do what I feel like at my core I am as a storyteller, but being able to do it at a large company and kind of match those skills. Anyone else?
So you talk about, sorry, you talk a lot about mentorship, which is very important. In my career, I know that mentorship allowed me to go in a certain trajectory in my career. How did you seek out your mentors, and how did your mentors receive you as a mentee?
In some cases they were formal, like that program that I was in, and I was assigned someone. The case of the one who turned out to be the most helpful, it was kind of a working relationship that just grew into that. We like literally physically sat next to each other. So as I was doing the job, and especially as I started off on the senior producer track, he was there and open to, because it's kind of his personality with the entire staff, of kind of being this, kind of larger than life figure. So once I kind of saw that he was somebody who was open to that, I just nurtured that relationship. And it was easy and natural, but I think it just kind of depends on where you are and who you think that you can connect with. And then taking the chance of going up to them and saying, hey, I really like the way you do this, or I really like to model my management style off of the way you handle this one thing. Would you be open to being my mentor and maybe, meeting up every couple of months?